Hey, welcome back. So let's look at JSON now. So what exactly is JSON? Now, JSON is a way to convert an object or an array into a string. Okay, so let's say, for example, so let me go to my HTML page here, and I'm going to remove all this. Okay, and let me remove. I really won't be needing any of these inputs or any of that. Let me remove that as well. All right, so back here, if I refresh, we have an empty page. Okay, so let's see what we can do here to describe JSON. Now, let's say, for example, you have a variable. You have an object. So I'm going to call this variable obj, short for object, but that's just a name. So you can give it any name that you want. So if I have an object like this, and then I say something like obj dot name is equal to or instead of obj, let me call this object user, for example, just for a bit more context. So if I say user.name is equal to, so I'll add my name there, and then I will add maybe it's an address or something, my address, and then if I, let's say, name, address, age, or something like that, whatever the number is there. Since it's a number, we're just going to add a number like that. Okay, so just a few details here, just to give us an object, a valid object. Now, if, for example, for some reason, this is because this is a good way to store data while you are running your page. So for example, here, if I say console.log and then I show user like that, then if I go to my browser here for a second and then go to the console, you will notice that the object is right here as expected. Okay, so there's address, there's age, and there's name. So this is a good way to store information, because there's a key and then there's a value, key, value, and so on. It's the same way if I had this data in an array. So for example, if I wanted to add more than one of these objects, let's say I wanted to add another user to this. Okay, so user is empty here, and then I have these details. I could add this to an array or something like that. Now that becomes quite a complex data structure right there, because there will be an array of objects. But then what may happen is that, let's say I want to save the state of my program at that time. So let's say there's this data inside my program and I want to save it, so that once I close down the computer and then I come back, I have to be able to regain this information back. Okay, so I want to still have an object that has this data when I switch on my PC again. So which means I need a way to actually store this data onto my drive. That way, when I switch it on back, I can retrieve it and make it exactly as it was, to avoid disturbing what the program was doing. So this is where JSON comes in, because with JSON, you can store this data exactly like this, but in a string format. So you're converting this object into a string, and that way you can easily save it. And then once you save it, it becomes easier to get back and then convert it back to an object. So it becomes a medium for saving. Now, the fact that you're converting to a string also makes it convenient to transfer from one PC to another. So let's say I had two computers with a similar program, and I want to transfer data between the two. what I will do is convert this data into JSON, which is a string, and then transfer that text to another computer, and then from that computer, tell that computer to get the text and convert it back to an object. This is good because regardless what programming language I use on the other computer, it doesn't matter because it will convert from a string into whatever format it understands. So this makes JSON very good for data transfer between APIs, between computers, from one computer to another, between one system to another, between one programming language to another. And also it makes it easy to save data when you want to save and then retrieve it back as arrays like this. So let's see what we can do to convert this particular thing into a string. Now, before I do that, I'm going to show you a little bit of how JSON looks like. So JSON is simply a key value pair. So for example, if I want to create an object, I will put those brackets like that. And then in our case, it's going to be like name and then a full colon there, and then the value of that name, like so. So once I do this, once it sees the curly brackets like that, it knows whatever is in here is an object. And then being an object, it's supposed to have a key and a value separated by a semicolon. Now, if I want to put more data like the age, for example, I'm going to put a comma and put age and then the full colon again, but this time I'll just use 24 like that because it's a number. And then if I want address, I will do that, address, and then full colon, and then my address, like that. So this is a text, this is a string, but it represents exactly that. So if I had this string, I can easily convert it to that format. But now, if you've noticed here, you don't see any syntax errors anywhere here because JSON is actually valid JavaScript text. So you can say var string like that is equal to, and then I'll just put single quotes on the outside like this just to hold it. So this string you see here is equivalent to this object here. So now I will disable this string right here just so we can echo the console.log user. Now let's take a look at how it actually looks like. So you see in here in the console, the object itself, you can see that it's got brackets there. It's a valid object because it even has this prototype thingy here and it says object right here. So if I click here, you'll see that there's all these prototype functions in there, which means it's a valid object. There are two but JSON functions you have to know. God. So there's an object that is created right into JavaScript, which is called JSON. It's like this. Okay, it's in capital letters all throughout. Okay, so now if I get this and console.log JSON like that, let's see what we're going to get. So you see JSON is right there and it's an object, of course, because everything in JavaScript is an object. And then if I click here, you see a few of these functions here. You see there's a function called parse, which is a function here, and there's another function called stringify. There it is. Okay, so let's concentrate on these two. So this one is stringify and this one is parse, and these are valid functions. Okay, so what do those two functions do? So let's figure out. Let's start with stringify, shall we? So if I say JSON.stringify, so I'll come back here for a second. That's what it is. It's like that, stringify. And then whatever item I put in there should be an object or an array of some kind. So I'll say user because user is an object. Okay, so console.log, we are logging this particular operation right here, which is JSON.stringify. What are we stringifying? We're stringifying the user. Okay, so what we are simply telling it is to convert this into a string, this object into a string, and then console.log it. So come back here, refresh, And now you see that that was an object, but now it's just a literal string like that, just a string. And if you notice this string right here, it looks very, very similar to what I had shown you here, even though the order of the items is different, but you get the picture. It's exactly the same. So now if I get this very string, I can convert it back into an object like that. So let's assign this string to, let's say, var str is equal to, short for string, and I will move this here like that. So the result of this stringify I want to put inside str, and then I will show str here, which I will get exactly what I just did here, same thing. So this is now a string version of the user. But then in order to convert it back into an object, what do I need to do? I need to use the parse. So I will say JSON dot parse like this, and I will put a string there. So keep in mind, JSON stringify takes in an object or an array. JSON.parse takes in a string and converts it to an object or an array. So here I'll say var AAR, short for array, is equal to, or maybe short for object, so I'll say obj, and then let's do a console.log of obj. So what are we doing here? We are converting user into a string, okay, stringifying it. And then once we get that string, we're converting it back to an object, and we put it inside obj, and then let's see what obj will contain this time. So if I refresh, you see that now it's a valid object and it's got things here like that. Okay, so in between saving it to a string here, I can save it to a text file and then close my PC. But then when I open my PC, I can then read from the text file and then do json.parse, which will give me back my object. This is the advantage of this process right here. Or what I can do is, once I convert it to a string, I can send it to another system, another computer, another API, and that computer will convert it to an object back, and then it can work with that data. So this is all that JSON does. It's pretty simple actually. Now, if you're creating JSON by hand, you can do it like this, the way you see it here. The spaces don't mean anything per se. Wait a minute though. Wait a minute. Now, one more thing I did mention in JavaScript is that JavaScript doesn't like multi-line text like this. So once I set some text and then I go to another line like this, it shows me that this is a syntax error right there. It's going to produce an error. So if I try to save this and try to run this, I will get an error here. Syntax error, literal, contains unescaped line break. So whenever you are trying to create a multi-line string in JavaScript, what you should do is use the backticks. Now the backticks are right next to number 1 on your keyboard above the tab key. So that's a backtick right there, and closing backtick. So once you use those two, you see that it accepts the string as it is. So if I refresh now, I do not get any errors. This is a valid multi-line string. All right, so JSON can be saved directly into a file. So if I want to create a JSON file, I will create new file like this, and then I will also do like this, and then save this file as a JSON file. So let's save this as JSON. So I'm just going to say data.json, JSON, and save it. Okay, so now once I put .json, I can get some syntax errors here if in case I mess up. So there will be name like that, and I will give my name there, comma, duplicate like that. So this is all it is with JSON, key value pairs like this. So I'll say name, and then let me say age, and then I'll say address. So let's get rid of these two because we don't want to keep typing and typing. So age, I will put 24. That's not my age, by the way, just a random number. I'm way older than that. My address, yes, but make sure that the last one here does not have a comma, okay, because that will cause an error. So just by putting these brackets like this, these curly brackets, it means this is an object. If I want to add another object, I'll have to put a comma here and then duplicate that like so. Now the reason I'm moving them to another line is just for that it's easier to read, but otherwise I don't need to. I can have this entire thing on one single line and it will mean exactly the same to the computer. No difference at all. Okay, but the last one shouldn't have a comma if it's the last one. And then the important thing also is, there are two ways to hold data together. The first one is through the curly brackets like this, where there's a name, and then it's actually a key, and then there's a value over here. That's how it goes, like this. But there's also a second way of doing things, which is using the square brackets like this, where you have an item. We just have a value and another value and another value. So the difference between the two is that this one is an array, but this one is an object. Now, the difference between an array and an object is that in an object, you get to define the key and the value. That way the data makes sense. You see, like here, there's a name. So I know that this data represents the name, this data represents the age. However, if I'm going to put this data in an array, I won't have the key. The keys will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So I'll just have a value here, like it will be like this. And then there'll just be a number over here, like that. And then there'll be my address here. Obviously in quotation marks because it's a string, like that. So this is an array version of this. So you can see that when you want data to be represented properly, you need to use an object like this one. But then if you need to have many objects in a specific place, you put them in square brackets like this. So once I have square brackets like that, it means I've created an array, and inside this array there is a single object. But if I duplicate this and put a comma in between, then now I have two objects inside one array. So this is how you can collect many objects inside one system, by doing this. So you have one object here, another object, and then you put square brackets in the end like that. But you shouldn't worry about typing the JSON manually, because you simply need to use the JSON.stringify to create it for you from an existing array of objects. So here in our case, I'll have to close this one with a bracket like this, and then that one with another bracket like that. Okay, so let me change this user to maybe something like John 34. Let's just say another address like so. So this is a valid JSON file because it contains, just by looking at this, you see that it has one object and two objects, and they are both inside one array. Okay, very good. So this is all about JSON. It's simply a data format that you can use to transfer between one system to another, between one API and another, or you can use that data to save and retrieved later on, because it converts the data into a string. So the data can be very complex, very long, and it can be converted into a string and back into an object. All right, so in the next episode, we'll look at Ajax which we're going to make use of JSON.